Welcome to the Fintech Founder Journey, where we explore great fintech products, great fintech businesses, and great fintech leaders. I'm your host, Mike Scott, and I'm also the co-founder and CEO of Nona Digital, an expert firm that accelerates product development for fintech and blockchain scale-ups. In today's show, I'm joined by Michael Young from Photon Commerce, and we'll be talking about his journey building an AI-powered platform for fintechs, invoices, and payments. Today's episode is sponsored by Nona Digital. Working with us to accelerate your fintech product means you get access to our expert product squads that cover development, UI and UX, product ownership, and architecture, and that have been building products together for a very long time. You get the benefit of a 40-person studio that is big enough for no key person dependencies to exist, but small enough so that you're always close to one of the principals. And you get the benefit of our reusable component library, which basically means we're often able to build your product faster than anyone else could at a comparable standard. As one of our clients said, Nona is the type of business that paints the back of the wardrobe, because if you want to be the best, that's the kind of thing you do. To get in touch with one of our principals or myself, head over to nona.digital to book a call directly. And now onto the show. Michael Young is my guest today, and he's an impressive guy. Michael's early career was as an engineer at IBM, after which he took a role as a researcher at Wharton, where he worked on a bunch of things that I can barely even pronounce, like being the co-inventor of the optical memristor. I think that's how you pronounce it. After that, he took a role as VP of Strategy and Marketing for a tech and education company. At around the same time, he co-founded Innova Dynamics, which was eventually acquired by TPK. At the same time he was going on that route, he co-founded another business, IonArmour, where he led product, tech, and business development. In 2016, he co-founded an eye care company, SmartFocus, which was a spin-out out of Stanford and was featured in publications like The Economist and Wired. Michael is an advisor to CareNX, which is a life-saving technology that has been recognized by Queen Elizabeth II and the Indian Prime Minister. In 2019, he was selected as one of the 100 entrepreneurs from around the world to join the prestigious One Deck program in San Francisco, where he remains a fellow today. All of this led into his current focus, which is as the sole founder and CEO of Photon Commerce. Photon is an AI platform for fintechs that reduces payments costs by up to 33% while accelerating customer acquisition. It is used by over 120 fintechs, has processed over $11 billion to date. They have an engineering-heavy team of 25 and are growing fast. They've raised multiple rounds of undisclosed amounts, and they already have significant recurring revenues. Michael is razor-sharp, incredibly focused, and seems to know what it takes to build a successful business. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. And welcome, Michael. Thanks for making the time.
It's a pleasure being here. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the intro, too.
No problem. Let's start with the basics. What problem does Photon solve, and who does it solve that problem for?
We are solving the problem of slow payments and manual processes that plague the B2B industry, starting in the US, but also extending globally. So the core problem is that people have to ask to be paid, right? Whether you're a person or whether you're a business. And the name for that is you send people an invoice, right? You don't just ask them to be paid like in the sort of consumer world. You have to have some sort of document to show people what you want to be paid for. The problem is that the vast majority of invoices today are on paper or they're on PDF. They're not inherently machine readable. And it causes huge delays in B2B payments, namely, net 30. It takes 30, 34, 40, 60 days for companies to pay their invoices. So it leads to a lot of inefficiencies, errors, exceptions, and disputes that happen. We're using AI to be able to read any invoice, no matter the format and also no matter the country, the origin, or the language. So whether that's like a Chinese invoice or a Japanese, say, purchase order, or a German, say, bill of lading, we can read all that in seconds and then also be able to push payments in real time against any of those invoices, and also automate reconciliation of any document to that payment file or that invoice.
So that's super interesting. The immediate thing that jumps to mind with me is that, in my experience, when clients don't pay us, it hasn't been because of a inadequacy of data or what have you, it's generally just been because they want to stretch out payment terms as long as possible. So how does your system help that problem? So, but when you say, typical problem is 30 days payments or 60 days payments, how does having machine readable invoices or having your AI read these invoices, how does that reduce payment time?
Yeah, so the machine learning, the AI can understand any invoice, extract any data from that invoice, and then standardize the formats of all of that data so that you can also automate approvals, do straight through processing, be able to detect if there's potentially any duplicate or fraud or mistakes in these invoices against, say, purchase orders or catalogs or contracts, and also be able to convert that into payments seamlessly. So your question is, well, what happens if people just want to pay their bills as late as possible, right? Well, we also worked with financing and factoring companies today, over a dozen of them. One of them is called Settle. They're a Series B startup that's backed by Kleiner Perkins, and they're just killing it in the marketplace. They enable basically e-commerce brands and merchants to be able to get paid instantly. So one way to do that is that you can factor, right? You can finance an invoice, get paid instantly. And so we enable those types of platforms to be able to lend out against any invoice instantly. And that also works both on payables as well as on receivables.
But also just listening to you speak, it's like if someone doesn't want to pay you, that they don't, like, no technology is going to make them pay you. But what I like about your product is, let's call it on the customer side that might delay payment, you're reducing administrative overhead for them. So they actually like that because that's got a cost associated with it. And let's call it on the customer, the person issuing the invoice. What's nice about your product is you're removing any excuse for people to say, oh, but this thing doesn't line up or this thing doesn't line up. You're just like, hey, everything's there. We know it's there. So basically the only reason you're not going to pay us now is because you're deliberately halting this process, which you can't change human behavior, but I totally see the value there. So thanks for the explanation.
Yeah. Now, we also work with financing companies to be able to incentivize people to pay their bills earlier. So for instance, like providing discounts, providing cashback, loyalty, other promotions, credits. Yeah. If they, pay invoices in advance or within, say, like 5 days. Yeah. Of when
it makes a massive difference, right? I mean, cash is just the lifeblood of any business, as anyone listening to this will know. Right. So, look, your career and your exposure has been pretty diverse. I mean, you're clearly very technical, but I mean, you've done research stuff, you've invented things, you've worked in med tech, you've worked in education, you've just worked like everywhere. It's a very, very colorful, very interesting career. You also seem to have a pretty decent network and exposure to people because of where you studied, where you live, who you know. What made you choose this problem? What made you choose this thing to go, okay, this is the thing that I want to solve out of all the options that I've got?
Yeah, the inspiration came when I was looking into some of the largest pain points and universal problems in the world. And, payments is one of the largest problems. It plagues consumers and businesses, alike. Everyone has to pay bills. Everyone has to pay employees. And everyone wants to get paid, right, by customers as soon as possible. But if you look at when we dug into the infrastructure of the payments industry, we were talking to Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, all the leaders there, and they said that one of the holy grails of the payments industry is to be able to get line item level details around any payment instruction. So we took that to heart. We were in talks also with over a Zoom call with Max Levchin, and he was saying that how did he found PayPal? He didn't know very much about the payments industry. He didn't come from that, but he was a cryptographic genius. He was able to secure the IOU, and so that founding story was very resonating with us because that's exactly what we're doing. But for B2B, all payments in B2B start with an invoice, right? So we are securing that invoice. We derived a lot of inspiration just from talking to over 1,000 companies and thought leaders in the space. And also fundamentally, I've been, I learned how to code when I was like 11 years old. I'm super nerd. My PhD work was in computational physics out of Stanford, and then dropped out to start my first few companies. I see that AI is going to be the most transformational technology of our entire generation. And with breakthroughs where, for instance, cars now can drive themselves, they're completely autonomous. Why can't someone be like the Tesla, but for finance, right? For payments, basically invent like a way for machines to be able to understand any payment, any invoice, anything related to finance, right? There's so many manual processes that are essentially just adding numbers together, right? And making sure that things reconcile. So when we dug into this industry, we're finding that even the largest payments companies were lacking large swaths of visibility in data. So we saw that this was the ultimate opportunity to basically marry AI technology to solve one of the largest problems in humanity, which is payments and trade. So today we work with many of the fintech leaders out there. A lot of the core processors, they process trillions of dollars a year, and even we're working with some of the large institutions that process trillions of dollars a day, as well, to infuse AI and data finally into payments.
Yeah, I mean, really, so much stuff there. Very interesting. So many things that jumped out there. I think the first thing that I just want to reiterate, mainly for the listeners, is just, I think you said you spoke to over 1,000 different people and businesses before you started building. That was before you started building, right? Or while you were building?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So it's a massive just research undertaking.
Yeah.
A lot of people say you need to talk to 100 customers, right, before you build a
10x
product.
That,
You gotta talk to more than that. So
I love that, because I'm sure you'll see this as well, because of your sort of, let's call it your mentor role in this world, or your exposure. But it still blows my mind how many founders start building before they've spoken to their target audience, thinking that I think this should exist, so therefore everyone else will. And I think even someone as experienced as you, it's just a great sort of reiteration. Like, you've got to speak to the customer. Like, your hunch, your feeling is not enough. You've got to get that validation. So that's really interesting. Your team is pretty small from what I can tell. You guys have already achieved, which is great. That's a compliment. I say that with the most amount of respect. So it's around 25 people. It's very engineering heavy. In our pre-interview, you were very proud of the fact, and I was very impressed by the fact that you've managed to bring some folks across from like Klarna and PayPal, like these big names that are often career aspirations in and of themselves for some of these product type people. How do you think you've managed to bring them across? Like, what's your secret sauce that makes people want to come and work for you when they're working for these massive sort of, let's call them fintech household names? What have you done right there?
Well, one thing that it's definitely not just pay. So as the saying goes, right, you don't want mercenaries, you want missionaries.
Yeah.
And so we look for very, very hungry and entrepreneurial folks that are in it for, the equity, the sweat equity, right, the upside from that. And there's no way that a startup could, compete against the likes of like a Visa or, PayPal. In terms of just raw pay. But the excitement that you're actually innovating and changing fundamentally the system that is basically like institutional payments and B2B payments today. Yeah. So that's really exciting. Being just also yourself, really hungry, and being also a visionary and effectively communicating, right, telling your story. We're all, right, at the end of the day, storytellers out there. Whether you're talking to customers and investors, right? So being able to just communicate, I've had to spend years and years honing sort of my communication skills so that, it's clear and effective. So that's one area that, I wish I developed, earlier on in my career, balancing that with, the technology side of things.
So this is actually a very good segue into a question I was going to ask you later, but this is a good time to ask it. We work with a lot of founders. I interview a hell of a lot of founders. I speak to even more founders across the level, from, fledgling startups all the way through to multiple tens of billions of dollars valuation. And very few of them are sole founders, right? You're a sole founder. And why I find this interesting here is because looking back across your career, from what I can tell, I could be wrong about this, but from what I could tell, you've always had co-founders. You've always done things with partners, but now the thing you're focused on at the moment, which seems to be your magnus opus or whatever it's called, your sort of what everything's led to, you're doing it alone from a founder perspective. You've got a team, and I'm sure you guys are very close because you can't do what you're doing unless you are, but you're alone. Now, you're very technical, and you've worked very hard to understand and become very adept at the business and the negotiation, and as you said, the communication. You said just now you're a visionary, right? And I don't know if you're familiar with the EOS system. It doesn't matter if you aren't from the book Traction, but they talk about visionaries and integrators, right? And that they couldn't be more different. You've got the visionary who is like me, who has 10 ideas a week. Almost all of them are shit. But then every now and then there's a good one, and that's why we were in business. I don't like detail. I'm not a systems guy. I'm not the guy that's going to cross every T and dot every I. And I have my strengths and I have my weaknesses. And then you've got the integrator that is the opposite. Very systems, very detail, usually very smart, usually very analytical, sort of doesn't sleep until they know that there's a process for everything. They're very different people. You seem to be this very, very rare both of those in one person. It's very rare that you get that. Most of us entrepreneurs think we are both of those, but we're actually not. Like we think we are, but we're not. But you actually seem to possibly be one of those people. My question here, I guess, is why have you decided to be a single founder? Because you've got the experience of doing things alone, doing things with partners. Was it a deliberate decision? Just talk to me about like the whole, like you're a single founder, why, and what is the experience like?
Yes, in all of my previous startups, I've had many co-founders in every single company. I get along and love my co-founders very much. It's basically like a marriage. In this company, I think I've developed sufficient experience in both business development, fundraising, hiring, marketing, sales, and obviously technology, where I was able to launch this off the ground, get revenue, get customers, get investment in a fairly short period of time in the beginning. So I would say it also goes back to how you define a co-founder. And so obviously there's no real hard and fast definition of a co-founder. But, we were very fortunate that we were able to raise from fantastic investors like Village Global and funds from the Angel List, for instance. That allowed us to make hires and hire a fantastic initial team. So with that, we're also able to close customers pre-funding. So we had some, good revenue, hundreds of customers essentially pre-funding. And then that allowed us to raise a lot more, obviously. And then, from that, you can just hire. So if you can already afford to hire a team, then there's not as much need, right, to bring on a co-founder, I would say.
A large part of it is kind of like, it's lonely doing it alone. But what I'm hearing from you is that you might not have co-founders, but you've got your family of your very early employees because you were able to do it. Is that a fair representation? It's like you're a sole founder, but you're not alone. You've got that family around you.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
Yeah. And that's really what it comes down to, right? Is because the founder co-founder thing has got two main themes. One is it's lonely at the top. It's lonely building a company, but there's what you've just indicated is you don't have to necessarily have co-founders to fill that gap. The second one is, and this is the far more common one, is if you're not a technical founder, you need a technical co-founder with you. You need that person from the beginning. You are that technical person. So you don't have that gap to fill. So I get it. I totally get it. And it's, again, it's impressive. I speak to a lot of founders and very few of them are doing this on their own. So we were talking about getting really good engineering talent and product talent from these big names. How are you finding the talent market at the moment? Are you like everybody else on the planet that's just, really struggling to get as much of the good talent as you can, like every other business on the planet at the moment? What's your experience of the talent market at the moment?
Yeah, it's definitely not easy. You have to spend a lot of energy to go out there and find the best people. And the way that we, convince and persuade folks to join our cause is very similar to the way that you might pitch to like investors. You're pitching people to leave their cushy jobs or to move to join a higher risk venture, right? So we pitch almost the same to a lot of our key folks as we would to investors. So they need to, you have to make sure that they understand the vision and they also are aligned right from day one. That, as well as we have fantastic investors. Many of them are executives, for instance, from like JP Morgan and Square and a number of other fintech unicorns. So they have fantastic networks. Our investors from like Village Global also have one of the greatest, I think, talent pools from the on deck community. So we have fantastic communities to also leverage.
Yeah, and I think it's becoming more and more common now, which is great. But really, it's interviewing great talent now it's a two-way interview. They're interviewing the business as much as the business is interviewing them. And I love what you said there. Is you basically got to pitch as if you're pitching investors, because you do. I mean, they kind of are investors, right? If they're coming in to participate in an ESOP scheme, they're basically making a bet. They're basically saying, hey, I'm going to decrease this cash. This cash was coming into my bank account. Therefore, I have to think about this as if it's a cash investment. They are investors. They're investing not just their money, which, their opportunity cost, they're investing their time. So, it's maybe a simple concept, but I love the way you put that. And I think that's wise words. Talk to me about building your team. And what I mean by that is, we're in the services business. So we build stuff for companies like yours. And 3 years ago, I would say we got about a 50-50 response to the question, how do you think about your product acceleration? How do you think about your product roadmap? About 50% of people would say, we never outsource anything. We only do everything in-house. And 50% of people would say, look, we've got a bit of a hybrid approach. We have a core team, and then we work with specialists around the periphery of our core product. Now, and let's see if you break our 100% streak. Now, for the last year, 100% of people that I speak to, they go, I wish we could build internally, but we just can't. So we've got a core team, and then we work with experts around the periphery. What is, you're super technical. We'll get to this later. I know you're an extremely driven, hardworking individual that probably is a bit of a control freak, like most founders. What is your approach to getting your roadmap delivered against? Is it fully internally? Do you need to kind of, let's say, own the people, the culture, the control and everything? Or do you have a hybrid approach where you've got a core team and you work with experts on the periphery?
Well, especially with the pandemic, right? Most of the world is work from home and distributed, whether you sort of like it or not. So, in previous companies, even if we are there in person, you're still spending most of your communication like over Slack or text or WhatsApp or whatever. Even if you're like in the next room from one another. So with the pandemic now, it's basically forced everyone to just be, comfortable with the distributed, workforce dynamic. So with that, we love working with folks from around the world, no matter, where they are. So many of them could be, say, educated in the US, but they're now digital nomads, flying around the world. That doesn't really matter to us. We only care about if people are, productive and engaged. And it doesn't matter if they're like in person or they're in like, Tibet or Nepal or whatever. We have engineers and, our team is from around the world. So we love the work from home sort of flexibility. It's sort of hard to imagine, I think, going back to being chained to a desk, right? in a cubicle.
But it's tricky, right? But there's a challenge to this because we were experimenting with something that we called remote second long before the pandemic. So, remote first was like a kind of cool term, and we tried the remote first thing and we thought that was actually shit. What we realized was people like to be around people, but we need, and this is going to sound really obvious now because of the pandemic, but just bear in mind, this was like, I think 5 years ago. Okay. So people like being around people, but we need to build businesses that don't require people to be in the same office. So we had the typical awesome tech office with yoga in the morning and beer fridges and, all the boring, or like not boring, but all the predictable stuff, and a room dedicated to Smash Bros and all of that stuff. But we built the business in such a way, we changed the business in that you didn't have to go there. So we said, hey, we want you to come here. We want to make it awesome, but you only have to be here every 10 days. And if you're out of the country, well, then obviously you don't. So we called it a kind of remote second approach, as we said, like, where you can, try and be together, but you don't have to, ever. You never have to be together. And that worked really well. It was a really good evolution. And obviously when COVID hit, that made it easy for us because we just went, hey, you know how you come to the office every 10 days? Well, just don't do that. It was a very easy sort of move across. But there's a kind of a downside to this, is because one of the very cool factors about our business, and we actually attracted a bunch of really good people with this, is, hey, you don't have to come to an office. You can work from home. And people were like, oh my God, this is amazing. I can spend time with my kids, my dog, my whatever. Like, I just don't like people. I don't know, whatever the case may be. Now we're really not that cool anymore, right? Like, everybody's work from home, whether you like it or not. So what's the next cool factor? So there's kind of a downside to this in a way, right? It's dropped the borders around the world. So it's great from a hiring perspective, but it's also like, it's created, like, we really need to think now as businesses, like, what is the cool factor? In your case, I love what you said, not mercenaries, missionaries. So your whole thing is like, join this movement, which is transforming how B2B businesses pay. But it's really pushing us as leaders to think about, like, okay, wait, work from home is not actually that unique anymore. And remote work is not actually that unique anymore. And just getting cool swag is not actually that unique anymore. What's the next thing we can do? So I really love that. And I also like what you're saying, is it's kind of like, are you engaged? Are you productive? Well, I don't care where you are. If you're in Tibet or if you're in San Francisco, it makes no difference. So I want to shift gears a little bit here, Michael. One of the things that I found in our original conversation really refreshing is, I can't remember what question I asked you, but basically you gave me a really refreshing and honest approach to, like, just not having much balance in your life, just being so incredibly passionate about what you do. And you even referenced some stories about some of your friends asking, like, hey, should I start a startup? And you were like, unless you're prepared to commit your life to it, probably not, basically. Just talk to me about your belief in terms of, like, what it takes to actually do what you're doing and how you think about, like, work-life balance and all of that stuff. Tell me about your sort of philosophy on that.
Yeah, my philosophy is basically, if you want to become an entrepreneur, then you have to be well over 100%, committed to that. And it's not a sprint; it's really a marathon. You got to commit at least 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, the rest of your life to that. And if you can't really imagine doing that, you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't just go into a startup thinking you'll just flip it, because chances are it'll completely fail.
Yeah.
I like to say that it's not, work-life balance. I try to make everything my life's work. So you have to really infuse a very strong sense of purpose into what you're doing, because that's at the end of the day how you also, convince people to leave their cushy jobs on a sort of sketchy, venture, right? High-risk venture. It's about the mission, or it's about the purpose. It's about fundamentally changing and improving the way that business is done. So I think you always think about, right, the higher sort of purpose for what you're doing. Don't just do it because it might make money, because chances are it's not going to make very much money. If you're doing a startup, right, there's a 90% chance of any startup failing. So there needs to be something just greater when you're thinking of starting a startup. And if there's any sort of shred of doubt in your mind, then it's probably an immediate sort of fatal flaw. It's total blow to the business.
So how do you how does that, because the sort of common culture at the moment, especially with the younger sort of people joining the workforce, is so purpose is very important. I think it's becoming more and more important. Our parents' generation, I think they were like, just get on with it. Doesn't matter if it's meaningless. Just puts food on the table. Now people need a sense of purpose. They need to know that what they're doing actually has an impact, which is great. there's also, I would say, like maybe an equal and opposite force saying, work-life balance is really important and self-care is really important, and it is. But these things can be in conflict with each other. These things can be a bit of a rub. How do you is the expectation of the people that join your business that they view life the same way, that they don't think about work-life balance, that they think about their life's work? Are you leading as a leader saying, hey, this is how I am, but I don't necessarily expect you to be like this? Or are you saying, hey, listen, if you show up and you want to work at Photon, this is what you're signing up to. These are the rules of engagement. This is our culture. These are our values. Like, I totally get your view on that. And Gary Vaynerchuk, I think, is quite sort of famous for just going on about, like, you can't expect the people in your business to care as much as you. You can't expect them to work as hard as you. I don't know where I sit on that, to be honest. I think some people I know are employees and they're incredibly passionate and work really hard because they feel like there's a purpose. I don't know where I sit on that, but I'm just interested in, like, you're very clear on your view, and I love that and I respect it. Just having led a lot of people over my career, I know that sometimes it can actually be a negative thing if you're very driven, very focused, very high output as a leader, because there's almost like a pressure that you're putting on people in your business that isn't always healthy. How do you think about that?
Yeah, great question. I would point to the distinction between being a leader and then being a manager. So many people are not, completely aware or haven't really heard the distinction there. But if you're a leader, then you inspire people to voluntarily follow you. Right. But if you're a manager, then you're just a boss, just bossing people around against their own will otherwise. Right. So as an entrepreneur, you have to be a leader. You can't just be a manager because no one's going to actually follow you unless you can pay better than like Google and Facebook. Right. Which you can't. So you need to inspire people to be great and to basically fulfill their sense of purpose and to be the best that they can be and thrive.
And that's easy, right?
Otherwise, that's easy, highly ambiguous situation. Obviously much easier said than done.
Yeah.
But you fundamentally, right, really need to believe in yourself, in the mission, in the business, right? And then other people will also then believe in you. Yeah. If you proceed into something with like doubts and you're pivoting around like every single week, right, then everyone's going to leave you, right? So back to your question, also about. Obviously, there can be big differences, not just between like founders versus employees, but just person to person. Obviously, we respect other people's work-life balance. We don't like rip people apart from like their families. That's like a horrific thing to do, and no one should ever do that. I was mainly referring to myself. I don't then go and sort of coerce people with like how I treat myself, right? Like I can be relatively tough on myself. Right, and demanding on myself. But to other people, you have to be very empathetic. You have to understand where they're coming from, their own, life constraints, their own families, and their own considerations. So there, I would just point to empathy. You have to really understand. Everyone has different sorts of priorities. Some people like also don't need any work-life balance, and some people absolutely need it. So you have to understand that.
Yeah, what you said makes a lot of sense. One of my first guests on the podcast is a really cool guy. He's a very, very successful entrepreneur doing his, I don't know what number venture now. It's actually in Silicon Valley now. And he said his mentor gave him such great advice. And he said something along the lines of, you only have two jobs as a founder. Number one is to bring people along with you, which is very much what you were saying, right? Like you've got to set this vision. You've got to make it inspiring enough that people want to follow you. And then number two is make sure you're never the smartest person in the room, which is also very difficult because especially someone like you that's got the engineering chops, it's hard to let go of that stuff. And that's what he was talking about a lot, is that when he grew his first business to like 50 people, 100 people, 200 people, 300 people, he really struggled to, I think it was a good visionary, but he said he really struggled to kind of realize or accept that there's different ways to do things that don't make them wrong. Just because it's different, like just because it's not how I would do it, doesn't mean that it's wrong. And, I already heard that from you now, especially the first part is like, you got to be a leader. And like, that is so difficult. Like I was being very facetious when I said like easy, right? Like that's the hard part. And I love how you made that distinction between leadership and management. I think it's much more nuance, and I'm sure we could wax lyrical for hours about that. But I love the way you broke those things up.
And then just to extend what you were saying, I have I totally agree with what you were saying. My job is to hire everyone to be smarter than me.
But you're pretty smart, so that must be tough.
No, I mean, there's plenty of areas that I'm lacking around, and that's why we have a fantastic team, so that everyone's like complementary. But here's another sort of criterion that guides me in hiring. Actually, two. One is I value people that can actively teach me almost every day. So can they say things that are really insightful that I've never thought about, that I didn't know, right? Those are the people I love to work with and hire or bring on as advisors. And then the second thing that I think about when I look at candidates is this person so good that I would, in a heartbeat, if we didn't have funds, furlough myself to pay them? Are they more basically valuable than me?
Yeah, right? I love that.
And I would say, in the team today, that applies to every single person.
Yeah,
I would happily forego my own salary to fund them.
Yeah,
right. Are they that great? And if they don't really pass that test, then they're not really hireable.
Yeah, I love that. In the earlier days of Nona, we had a similar, I wouldn't say we got it right all the time, but we had a similar kind of goal, which was every person that we hire needs to be the best at something in the business. You can't do that beyond a certain size because, I don't know, it just doesn't really work. But and I wouldn't say we got it right all the time, but I think it's a really great driver. And I love what you say as well, because let's be honest, in many early stages of businesses, you do pay other people and not pay yourself. So it's like a real thing. It's not even hypothetical in the early stages of a business. And I love that. Another guest on the podcast, Fred Chibesta, who's an incredibly impressive entrepreneur, he has another method where he's he's Australian, but he lives in New York now. And he has some drive that he does all the time from some state to another state. And it's about 6 hours. And he loves the drive. And one of his questions is, while he's interviewing the person, he's just like, would I enjoy sitting in a car with this person for that drive? Would it be interesting or would I hate it? And a couple of times he's not hired people because he's they're really good, but I couldn't sit in a car with them for 6 hours. And therefore there's going to be a cultural problem. And I like the way it's thinking out the box. It's not just going, is this a cultural fit? It's actually going, put yourself into a situation where that would be tested and try and figure out how that goes. So I really like those shares. Those are super useful. So last question before we move on to more rapid fire questions, because this is going really fast, which is always a good sign. I'm really enjoying it. You're very focused. You seem to be very high output. You're juggling a lot of balls. Your context switching must be insane, going from negotiating with a lawyer to getting into some engineering issues to hiring to whatever else it is you're doing. You look like you're pretty chilled. You don't look 85 years old yet. I don't know how old you are, but you look like you're in good shape. You look pretty healthy. You look pretty high energy. I look more tired than you, although I do have a newborn at home. Talk to me about behaviors or habits or rituals or routines or things that you do on a daily basis or a weekly basis I get the sense that you aren't a peak performance guy. I get the sense that you're an optimal performance guy. I get the sense that you're not someone who spikes. I get the sense that you kind of find this level and try to sort of keep that momentum. Talk to me about things that you do to stay focused, energized, and sane on your daily basis or weekly basis.
I would say exercise is extremely important. So one of the largest, role models in my life is Richard Branson. Just last month, I was at his, private island, hanging out with him for about a week.
Awesome.
And he just exercises basically 8 hours a day at least. He plays 4 hours of tennis. And then, I went bike riding with him, played him in tennis, played chess with him. So he's just in tip-top shape. He's 71, and he's fit enough to go into space and pack. So he's just a huge source of inspiration. He's also one of the kindest people you will ever meet in life, and is a genius and a visionary. So I get a lot of inspiration there from him. That being active is not only good for your body, it's also really good for your mind. It gives you mental clarity, gives you energy. And, a 5-minute exercise in the morning is better than 5 cups of coffee. In terms of like in all areas, in terms of energy and being awake and just improving your business performance too, staying alert, engaged. So that's huge. Now especially with COVID, it's been kind of difficult to exercise, but you find ways to even just exercise indoors, if not go outside. So that's really important.
I have a friend. I want to come back to you just dropped in there that you were at Richard Branson's island last month. So we're going to get back to that in a second. But I have a friend, how's this? So he's an ultra distance runner. He's pretty famous. He's he's one of the best in the world. But during COVID, he ran 100-miler around his garden, which is like not big. So he did 160 kilometers or 100 miles in like a small garden in one go. I mean, right. That is like mental. I would just go insane, absolutely insane. So, you can do these things at home. Let's just quickly derail for a second. Just go back to that. What were you doing on Richard Branson's island? That's pretty great, man. You just dropped that in there. What's the connection? How do you know him? How did you get there? How did you crack the nod?
We've been friends for several years. I met him a few years back, and also like on his island. We know some like entrepreneur friends in common. We just traveled to his island and hang out with him. Basically, amazing. It's really funny because the next island across the island from him is owned by Larry Page, and then the other island there used to be owned by like Elon Musk. So it's just a good source of morale and inspiration, right? To aspire to one day maybe you can own an island yourself.
I love how it's like, you're at a certain level when you're not talking about like the house next door. You're talking about the island next door. Like that's another level of keeping up with the Joneses. I love it. That's super cool, Michael. I mean, that's a really cool little bit of information that I missed in the pre-interview. I love that. Look, I'm conscious of time, and I never ever run over. So I want to move to some more sort of rapid fire style questions. So don't worry about getting into detail. Just kind of first thing that comes to mind. And here comes the first one. What is your biggest challenge or your biggest fear in business?
I would say I think talent is the main one. So, if you make the wrong hire, that could really like make or break, right, your business. So people at the end of the day is the most important thing, making sure that you can find, right, and retain the best people and inspire also the best people. That's the one.
Yeah. The most important and most difficult without a doubt, right?
Yeah.
What single piece of advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
That's a good question. That be? I would say, when I was 20 years old, that's very different from like when I was 22 or 25. But when I was 20 years old, I was extremely technical. So my piece of advice when you're going through college, or when you're 20, to broaden your horizons, to not just be exclusively focused on like one, vertical or one sort of technology, but know that in life, there's lots of pivots that come in. So when I was 20, I was applying to, for instance, like grad school, like PhD programs. And, most of the PhDs that go through like a PhD program, they pivot and do something completely different from their PhD. So that's something I never knew. But now that I know that, it's a good thing that I dropped out of my PhD program.
Yeah, I think that's good advice for like people doing comp science stuff, is that, have a business degree as well, or have something different to bring in. I think that's really wise. Next one. What content are you currently consuming?
I love Reddit. I love TechCrunch. I read tons and tons of blogs. Payments.com, is a fantastic payments related, media site. And, obviously I read like The Economist and other economics, blogs too.
Cool. What's the last book you read cover to cover? and Audible is acceptable?
I read Losing My Virginity by Richard Branson.
By your mate, Richard Branson, yeah.
So you have to,
while you were on the island, I hope you read that while you were sitting on the island. Cool. And then what is something that you're going to be doing in the next 7 days to improve yourself or your craft?
Over 7 days. Let me think. Well, over 7 days. All right. Let me think. Well, we are engaging a bunch of expert consultants and advisors on a Nextgen product that we're working on. So we're really excited about that.
Cool. So look, we jumped around a lot today, which is great. I like to do that. My very ADD brain needs that, and I certainly got that today, and it was really great. I just love your openness, and you're clearly very smart, very capable, but just your theme there is constantly learning from people and improving. Of everything we've spoken about today, what is the one thing that you would want the listeners to take away with them?
I think number one is never stop asking questions and just being hungry to learn. So just being inquisitive and never being satisfied with just the status quo.
Yeah, love it. Michael, it's been awesome. I really appreciate your shares and your humility, and I'm definitely going to be watching Photon Commerce. I think this is going to be a business to keep a close eye on. Do you like to be contacted or followed? And if you do like to be contacted or followed, where can the listeners contact or follow you?
Absolutely. You can email me anytime at michael@photoncommerce.com. Also, you can reach out on our website as well, or LinkedIn me. Michael Young from Photon Commerce.
Or just go to Branson's Island and you'll probably see Michael there. It sounds like that's a decent shot as well. Thanks for making the time.
Your tennis racket.
Yeah, thanks for making the time, Michael. Really appreciate it. Appreciate you carving out this time and sharing so openly.
Thank you, Mike, for the opportunity.
To the listeners, I hope you got some value from today's episode with Michael Young from Photon Commerce. I sure did. I mean, I think my main takeaway is very much what he said at the end there, which is just, this is a super smart guy, very capable, very competent, very well educated. And yet the theme is just constantly have people around you that can ask you better questions, teach you something, just continually learn and develop. And it's a theme that I see among some of the most successful people, is just that continual openness to learning. Thanks for listening to the show. If you'd like to discuss your fintech or blockchain product with us, you're welcome to book a call with one of our principals on our website, which is Nona Digital. And I'll be back next week with another episode to explore the Fintech Founder Journey.